slow down. Progressives are saying, here's how we're going to deal with it in three very different ways. And as we're going to see, the stuff hits the fan, what happens to the United States as a result of that. All right, so that is a backdrop. Then what I want to do is to start out with this discussion of the Great Depression, and then switch over to the New Deal. Great Depression, 1920s, period of time we left off in regards to progressivism, is the dawn of what one newspaper, Time magazine editor, called the American Century, which should make you feel a little nervous. Here we are 100 years later, but nonetheless. The American Century said the United States has emerged as an economic superpower, and to a level that had never been seen before. Right? And you can read the statistics here, right? You know, we lend money. We are a net lending nation. We export oil. We are an oil exporting nation. Most manufactured goods are going to come from the United States, most high quality manufactured goods. Steel, food, a very important export product. You know, electricity, all of this stuff, automobiles. I mean, at one point in time, the big three in Detroit made 92% of all automobiles on the planet. Think about that, right? 1900, there's about 400 automobile manufacturers. By 1924, there are 4 left in the United States, maybe 5. Count Nash. Nash is going to be gone pretty quickly. So it's gone through that period of consolidation, right? The United States is providing for workers. Henry Ford and corporate liberalism is providing for workers a reasonable living wage that they can look at and say, I can be upwardly mobile. My children can be more successful than I am. I'm going to own my own house. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to have money for a vacation. Right? You've got socialist revolutions around the planet. Soviet Union, Mexico, a variety of different contentions that are going on. They're looking to the United States as saying they figured it out. Right? We're not that way anymore. Right? And you watch TV. It's mind-boggling to hear some of the things that are said on television these days. I always loved back in the day when it was when Obama was president. We're no better than Greece, right? We're crappy, and our economy sucks, right? And that's what I've heard, right? Inflation is up, so our economy sucks. Let's go to the great Wikipedia in the sky. Oh, Wikipedia, please tell me what's going on. Yes, confirming, continue. I don't know what that means. What I did was just Google list of countries by gross domestic product, so the amount of money that they generate, right? And you look here in the International Monetary Fund, United Nations, World Bank, all provide estimates on that. Oh, look, here's 2021, this is 1 year, $22 trillion of wealth generated by this country in a single year. It increased. Oh my God, how did that happen? Well, 6% growth per year, which happened last year, is pretty damn good. Right? You know, you look and see the economy booming quite a lot. What this says is that the United States could effectively buy the People's Republic of China and have quite a bit of money left over for some smaller European countries if we wanted to. Right? Where is Greece, by the way? Is Greece even on here? There's Finland. There's Greece. So we're not 52. Right? So when you hear, oh, we're like Greece. Oh, really? Yeah, I think Greece would change with us any moment if we'd like to. So it's important to kind of recognize and keep things into perspective. We expect this today. We expect this kind of national wealth. And we expect, in essence, that there is a fair division, right? That the reason why the United States is so wealthy is because people are law-abiding citizens. They respect personal property. They respect civil liberties. They respect each other's rights. That breaks down all of the, this is the goose that lays the golden egg, right? So again, it's like you're looking at a world in the 1920s where, on the numbers at least, the United States is so far ahead of the rest of its competition as to be almost laughable. That is not the case with our military. Then, not today. Today, we'll get to today. But then, we do not have a powerful military. So we don't have a way in which to protect this overseas, et cetera, et cetera. However, and again, this is the advantage of historians looking back. Hindsight is 20/20. You can see the instability. You can see the fact that this economy is pocketed, that it's only benefiting a certain group of people. College educated, white middle class, right? Or at least middle class. More of an emerging African American middle class by this point in time, right? But by and large, those progressives we just got done talking about, people who are accommodating economic change, what you see are these deep pockets, particularly in rural America, right? World War I ends, we'll come back to World War I. World War I ends, and for the next decade, the rural economy goes into a Great Depression 10 years before this. What does that mean? Well, almost 45% of the American public live in rural society at this point in time. Not so today. But 45% are in depression for a decade, which means what? They don't have money. If you don't have money, you're not going to have fun in Las Vegas. If you don't have money, you cannot play in an industrial capitalist society. Automobile market, you can read these as well. Residential construction, we'll come back to that in just a second. Business inventory. When you talk about inventory, you hear this stuff on the news, right? Inventory is going up and going down and yada yada. Inventory simply means, and we live in a world where inventory is micro thin, right? That's why there's supply side issues, right? But inventory means, in essence, that you're keeping enough product available for the next person who walks in to buy it, right? And not having to turn someone away that wants to buy a car. Sorry, we don't have a car in the lot. You want to make sure to have something that someone can walk out of your store with that you have sold. You don't want to have too much, because it's just sitting there, and you've already paid for it, you've already worked it. Right? Inventory by 1925 is 4 times what it was, by 1929, it's 4 times what it was less than 5 years earlier. Meaning what? You're starting to get feelers that people aren't able to buy all the things we're making. Doesn't matter how cheap a Model T is $240 by 1929. And even in those days, that's cheap. Right? It wasn't a question of being able to have a low enough value on the products that you're selling. These income discrepancies become much more obvious once you get to the 20th century. A smaller amount of people are controlling more and more of the wealth. It's not as bad as it is today. What that means is that you don't have millions of people with the same consumer access as you're going to see in a consumer society. Stock speculation frenzy is largely, and I mentioned the stock market, and we'll come back to it in just a second. The stock market is not a gamble, right? You want to gamble, you do the day trading. Oh, I'm going to go out and do day trading. Right? That's what this speculation. I'm going to buy it today and sell it tomorrow. That's day trading. Right? You look in, I have an investor manager we've had for 30 years. Because show your students this. This starts in 1934, and it ends in 2014, right? So that's the stock market performance corrected for inflation. What's the clear and obvious trend here? If you invest here, you got a lot of money here, right? The stock market is about as ironclad a finance capital instrument as you're going to find. The only other one is home ownership, right? It's the ability to say, I own a piece of property, I own a home, I'm not renting. Right? Those two are very strong indicators for a healthy industrial capitalist economy. And they're all falling, they're all dropping. And we don't have the crash yet, right? 1929, I should say, the questions we got is, was it preventable? And the answer is basically human nature says no. Right? We're just greedy. We do things that we're trying to get more money, whatever. What responses are fashioned by the 2 presidents who are involved in this? Herbert Hoover, a Republican, Franklin Roosevelt, a Democrat. Why is this depression great? Again, I don't use that. Oh, it's great. It was a party time, right? It wasn't a rave. Great in the sense that this kind of level of desperation is going to severely affect the core nature of the United States, of how we see ourselves. And what's the New Deal do, right? And again, what I love is that, I dropped this, that's a hell of a book, right? I signed this in my grad spot, really? You gotta be kidding me, Juan. There is plenty of scholarship on the New Deal. You do not have to turn to radio and TV shows to tell you what the New Deal is, right? The New Deal is pretty good. I always like to say, again, you don't have to believe me, it's written here in black and white, right? It's this great regulatory state. There are 4, tell them I'm busy, there are 4 regulatory agencies created by the entire New Deal. 4, that's it. Right? So it is not what Grandpa on the radio is telling, this is what it is. It's a lack of understanding. So we're going to see this. And it's not new. It's not something that is Democrat or Republican. It is a response to these conditions. All right. The crash is often seen as the cause of this, and it's not the cause. The stock market is going to lose massive amounts of capital. Where does that capital go? If all of a sudden it's valued here and then it's not valued here. There's my joker. He was coming pretty soon. It's gone. right? That's what happens to capital, which means what? You can't use it to invest in a steel industry. You can't use it to buy a new house. You can't. What it's doing is sucking money out of the American economy. And one of the things that you see from that previous slide is that all of these are indicators of people with not enough money in their pockets. Not millions of, some of them are got a lot of money, but not an average American who has got money in their pockets to buy a house, to buy a car, to buy these kinds of things. The crash is going to recover. The stock market is going to recover. Again, check my handout a second ago, right? The stock market is fine and dandy because the American economy is fine and dandy, right? And it's looking and saying, in essence, what has occurred. What has occurred is a shock to the system. And it's a system that is already delicately balanced by those things that I talked about before. What it does is send a panic through financial markets. These are people who don't make cars or steel or hamburgers or something like that. They are dealing simply with money. And what they see is insecurity in the market. They're going to pull that money out. If you're in Las Vegas and suddenly Las Vegas gets insecure about their money and they pull all their chips away, what the hell are you going to do? You ain't playing, right? It's the exact same concept. What causes the Great Depression goes on and on and on. I won't slam this again because it's too early and I already scared you one. Right? There's a lot of stuff. And back in my olden days, I would step through each one of these individually and students would hate me even more, right? And I'm not going to do that. Basically, there are three causes. They are all interlinked. The first one, as you can see here, are consumer issues. I would argue this is as important as the ones that are coming. We are now a consumer society. Why is Ford successful? Because he switches his workers from thinking of themselves as producers to consumers. They're willing to be Charlie Chaplin because they are going to make enough money to buy the things that they want, right? What you're seeing here, farm prices, wages, small businesses, and in particularly unsecured credit. That's credit that doesn't have anything signed over. Right? So if I have a mortgage on my house, the bank has the ownership papers of that house. And so if I default on my mortgage, it goes back to them. They have a piece of secured credit. Your car is the same way. You don't have the deed if you haven't paid off your car yet. You don't have the deed to your car. The bank does. Once you pay it off, they send you the legal ownership of that piece of property. Unsecured credit is the credit card. Right? If you go bankrupt, believe me, do not file Chapter 13. It's the worst thing you can do. But if you can't pay your bills, you got the people who have lent you this money have got nothing that they can go after, right? They can make your life a living hell, but they certainly don't have the right to come and say, we're going to take your house, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. This American lifestyle, I mentioned on the first day of class, the American dream is alive and well. It's the American lifestyle that is comparable. That I can afford this stuff, that I deserve to have this kind of house, that I deserve to have this kind of vacation. That's what's going to be increasingly driving the anger in this country of saying, in essence, I can't have $2 gallon gas. By God, I'm not paying money that they pay in Europe. Why? That's what they pay in Europe. Well, by God, I deserve. None of that's guaranteed. All of that's kind of cultural. So consumer issues are a key component of this. Production issues. I mentioned Henry Ford can make a car in less than an hour, from pieces of automobile to a fully functional automobile in less than an hour. They can create this demand, or I should say create these products out there. Most of this is going to be driven by advertising in the 1920s. Again, a component of pop culture which is brand new. Telling people why they should buy stuff, because it'll make you feel like more of a man or more of a woman or whatever, more American. A lot of that's artificial. The biggest kind of production issue that begins to emerge is home ownership. And Corpus is bad at this. Corpus Christi in South Texas is, if you want to make money in this market right now, it's real easy to make it as a rental, right? Our rental market is as tight as San Francisco. And San Francisco is a very bad rental market. When you see that, what you see is an economy that is not helping people become upwardly mobile. When you own your own home, even if it's a first starter home, right? It doesn't have to be $1 million mansion, but even a starter home. When you own your own home, what you're doing is you're spending money on a piece of property that is then going to increase in value. Yes, it ups and downs, what have you, and you have to time it and whatnot. But for the most part, the modern multiplier effect, if it was once the railroads, is now home starts. Because it says that Americans, A, are confident enough to sign a mortgage. And if you've ever gone through a mortgage signing process, you think writing on the exam on Friday is going to be hard, right? Sign this, initial this. You'd be in there for an hour and a half doing that kind of stuff, right? But you're confident enough you'll be able to pay all this stuff back. But also when you buy a home, what else do you do? Landscaping, you gotta have a man cave, you gotta have a she shed, you gotta have, a king size bed. You buy the accoutrements that go with that. And who's building all these houses? Carpenters, plumbers, electricians, right? That's the multiplier effect. It's more than just stuff. It's kind of how it works out. All of these are declining, right? And that is, again, an indicator of that. The last one is sort of government and regulatory issues. And for the most part, since 1896, what you've seen at the national level is an argument that says, get out of the way of business. It arguably is helping business, but there certainly is a sense of saying we're not going to regulate anything. Right? Business of America is business. Which means what? Which means there's no checks and balances put in place to make sure that a stock being offered, right, is actually worth the value, that the product being sold is actually worth the value. These monetary policies of gold standards, for example, are deflationary. Which means that taking money out of the system. All of these are combining. Now you know why students really dislike when I took a day and a half to go through these individually. All of these macroeconomic issues are in essence decreasing the amount of money that is available and in circulation. And if you're a business and suddenly you're looking and saying, I sold 100 units last month and I sold 50 this month, unless you're in the business of being a philanthropist, you're not going to keep the same workforce. You're going to say, I can't keep my profit margins, I'm going to start laying people off. The minute you start laying people off, what happens? They don't have money to buy the products that are already stacking up on the shelves. That's what a depression is. A depression is this sort of cyclical, can't pull ourselves out of it. And the short answer of what is the New Deal? The New Deal is the federal government stepping in and recognizing they got this big water hose, this water cannon, and it's filled with capital. And they can turn it on and start spraying that capital into an industrial capitalist economy. Now you can overdo it, right? You can lead to hyperinflation. You can lead to all kinds of problems by doing that. But the only way in which federal governments, and they do this in 2007, the only way to prevent a depression, the cyclical, can't stop it, down we go to the bare bones, is to find a source of capital, and in this case it's going to be the federal government. So, short answer in terms of this reason why I say that is because corrupt business practices are particularly evident in the banking industry. Anyone could say that they're a banking, give me your money, right? And I'll make sure. What does a bank do? Well, if I'm the bank, I know this power structure, I should make you guys the bank and I'm the lender, but if I'm a bank and really you give me $1,000 and I say for your $1,000 I'm going to give you 3.5% return on investment. Pretty good for a capital. Sounds like minuscule. Welcome to industrial capital. Right? It grows slowly over time. So I'm going to have Yuli's $1,000. She's going to be getting 3% on that on a contracted basis. The rest of you, at least in the first row, want to start a business, want to buy a home, want to buy a car, a truck, or something like that, are going to come to me and say, can I borrow money from you, bank? And I'll be, yeah, sure, I'll lend you $1,000 and I'll charge you 12% interest, right? I will make money by using other people's money. That's what financial industries do. I'm not going to take all the $1,000 because I'm looking and saying, well, you got good credit, right? I'm going to say, yeah, I'll lend you $1,000, but I'll also lend you $1,000 and also lend you $1,000. What's the problem? The problem is that if all three of you go bankrupt, right, and all of a sudden the bills start coming due, all I've got is really $1,000. Right? The reserves are important for a lending institution when times get tough. And most of these banks don't have it. Right? And it creates a psychological pressure. Are you going to, once you start to see this process begin to tank in 1929, are you going to sit back and go, I'm a good American, I don't want to lend to panic? Right? We went through panic buying as a result of COVID. You know the answer to that. You're going to go 6 weeks without toilet paper, right? You're going to look at this and go, wait a minute, I ain't going to be the last one in line to pull my money out. That's just human nature, right? Herbert Hoover is elected in 1928. The election is in 1928. He takes office in March of 1929. There is no Great Depression. And Hoover is often presented as this sort of Nero figure, right, fiddling while Rome burns. He is as accomplished a progressive. This is Franklin Roosevelt saying before the election, the Democrats saying, this Republican should really be president. Hoover is orphaned at a young age. He and his siblings moved to, I believe, Washington State. He puts himself through college. He studies petroleum engineering, pretty good discipline at the time. Goes to Stanford University, begins to instruct on how to go look for petroleum reserves around the planet, makes millions, right? So he is a self-made millionaire. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to use this to build rockets to go into outer space or whatever, he turns around and says, you know what, being someone who has lifted themselves up by their bootstraps, I want to help other people who have been hit by consequences that are of no fault of their own. Hoover is going to be in the administrations of almost every Republican presidential figure since 1920. And he is going to focus on things like poverty relief and aid to those in World War I who are going to be displaced by this. He recognizes he's a classic national progressive, but his sensibility is really corporate liberal. His sensibility is that those who have made money, like himself, are the ones who are best positioned to say how that money should be used and how it should be effective. They don't form unions. We'll figure, like Henry Ford, don't form a union, I'll pay you. But we'll do this because it's the right way to do it. As a result, his kind of ideology, certainly kind of left of center for contemporary Republicans at that point in time, is volunteer cooperation. Do it because it's the right thing to do, right? Henry Ford, U.S. Steel, your businesses are about to go under, but don't cut wages. The tiger comes walking in. I know you're hungry, but just don't eat any of the students. Sure, Wonky, I'll voluntarily not do that. Comes after me, right? He does not like, big state interference. He's, after World War II, most people kind of forget this late, he is one of the most vocal critics, a conservative Republican, against the police, kind of CIA, FBI, internal investigation kind of stuff, Cold War spy espionage, the kind of castigation of anti-Americanism. He's going to be a very strong critic of that. And he's the last Republican since Nixon, I guess, to really say we're going to propose a balanced budget. Again, this argument that supposedly the two political parties are fiscally conservative, they are not and never have been. Right? So again, you're entitled to your blogs and TVs and radios and believe whatever the hell you want. Pigs can fly. But if you look at the basic facts, he is one of the few Republicans who's saying, we're not going to spend more than we bring in. Right? We'll come back to this when we get to George Herbert Walker Bush, Papa Bush, Folder Bush, Bush 1, not Bush 2. His early actions in response, so he's in office for 6 months and the economy begins to tank. His actions are, as we're going to see, are pretty similar to what Franklin Roosevelt. It's really kind of a scale of difference. He recognizes that the agricultural crisis is really at the heart of this thing. These are the same populists. These are the same mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore, pitchforks and all that kind of stuff that the Caller Times was talking about before. And he is going to begin to work towards marketing cooperatives. What were those once called way back in the populist era? Federal sub-treasury. Ways in which you can help people who are capitalists market their product without relying on somebody who has more money than you. He pressures businesses, you can read it yourself, cut wages. He tells the Federal Reserve to start to ease the amount of money, make more money available. And he begins to do public works projects, federal spending, simply for the product purpose of getting something that is of use, but not as market generative. And I'll come back to this and when we talk about public works, we talk about government spending on public works, there is no private company that's interested in building the Hoover Dam. There is no private company that's going to step in, the South in particular, Texas, Tennessee, etc. There aren't any private companies who are looking to say, let's bring electricity to South Texas. Let's make it so that people have electric access in places like rural Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. Right? No private company is doing that. What the federal government is doing here is saying, we know that people are unemployed. We know that this is going to require hiring people who have these skills. The public market is not, they're not taking jobs away. They don't exist. And guess what? At the end of the product, it ends. Your road is constructed, your dam is built, your TVA is, you've got electricity, right? You're done. And there is not a permanent sense of, and what we're going to talk about, you know, Nazi Germany, for example, state ownership. Volkswagen, a people's car, is a state-owned automobile company, or was at the time, right? None of these presidents are going to be doing this. Roosevelt or Hoover is going to start in ways that are going to look very familiar to what Franklin Roosevelt was doing. But if you're in that mentality, well, one's a Republican good, one's a Democrat bad, or vice versa, you just it's an absurd, it's a childish way to look at complex problems. Oh, well, I have to first see what color, you know, are they red or blue? Are they from this state or that state? Hoover is trapped by the success of his own political party. From 1896 on, the Republicans have been dominant at the national level. And what that does is it solidifies this thinking that this is the answer to everything. Very busy slide, I'm not expecting you to memorize it, right? Hoover himself, and this is true of a lot of corporate liberals, has trouble negotiating, right? Academics are the worst of this, right? Oh no, it's absolutes. No, this is producerism, right? He is somebody who really struggles with the politics of getting things done. His successor, Franklin Roosevelt, is a master at it. Right? I already mentioned Lincoln was very good at it. McKinley was very good at it. Lyndon Johnson's going to be very good at it. Getting things done. He is unable to control his own Republican Party in Congress, who begin to set up protectionist measures. Again, I never thought I would have this conversation, but after 2016, I've had to. The Republican Party is going to lead with this argument following the Great Depression. It is idiotic to put up protectionist measures. It harms us to protect us. Why would somebody do it? Why would you have these protectionist measures? Because local politicians know that they're protecting somebody who's going to vote for them. You're doing it for the votes. And what do we see in 2016 and 2017 is the return of tariffs. Right? Something the United States hasn't done since 1934. Why? It's not economics. It's not conservatism. It's politics, right? He is unable, in this case, Hoover is unable to control it. And there still is this kind of sense of social Darwinism, right? His own Secretary of Treasury. Screw them, right? If they can't tough it out, then they should be, weeded out in some kind of eugenics kind of argument here, right? Double check them. Into the abyss. Hoover is going to be limited as he's going to try these measures. They're sort of drips and drabs, right? Not really foursquare, taking on the nature of this. While he waits, the industry, the financial industry, completely collapses. Right? In a bad year, in those days, there were a lot more banks. In a bad year, it's not unusual to see up to 500 banks collapse. How does it collapse? Well, in my example before, all of the creditors who I've given, I've loaned someone $1,000 to buy a car, they go bankrupt. The person who still owns that debt is going to come to me and say, give me my $1,000 back. And I'm like, I don't have it. I've loaned it out. Oh, well then, we're going to take all of your assets. And that debt goes right up to the next level of lending institutions. The modern financial system is interwoven. And in a sense, what you see is this cascading effect of good banks being pressured by the collapse of bad banks. When bankruptcy occurs, that debt still is hanging out there. And it's, as I suggest, a reverse multiplier effect. When Hoover takes office in 29, a bad year for banks, what you see is by 30, 31, and 32, there's going to be a dip there for a reason we're going to talk about. Is that by the last year of his presidency, right, this is in full-blown crisis mode. 4,000, I mean, if you just think about it, are you going to put your money in a bank? Are you going to put your gold in a bank? No, right? And you've lost faith in the idea that capital needs to circulate. That is really bad news for an industrial capitalist economy. Right? John Maynard Keynes is an economist at this point in time. And he's saying the only one who can stabilize this, the only thing big enough that can stabilize this is a federal government. the US federal government, the British federal government, the Mexican federal government, whatever. And the only one who has the capital to spend at this point in time is that same federal government, if you have a national currency, right? So these are beginning to collapse. Hoover response. This is the beginning of the New Deal, right? So if you ever want to go and get your doctorate, first you got to get an MA, and then you get a doctorate, and it's a room kind of like this, and it's about this. The entire faculty of your graduating institution, so I had about 35 professors, come in a room like this, and they just pepper you with questions, right? Blanky, you know, I mean, you, obviously within your discipline. And one of the little gotcha, how new is the New Deal, right? Yeah, it's a stupid question. How new is the New Deal? It ain't. It's starting during Herbert Hoover. It's starting during a conservative Republican's administration. Don't believe me? You don't have to. There's libraries full of this stuff. Hoover is going to look and say, there needs to be something done to shore up these banks that are, he doesn't use the language, too big to fail. Because if they go down, we're all back to hunting and gathering and whatnot. The Federal Reserve proves, because these are private banks, the Federal Reserve says we ain't spending money to bail these banks out. And the federal government steps in 1932, January 32, an election year, and does something called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. You'll see it on the sheet, right? RFC is the beginning of this alphabet soup. What this says is that we are going to make sure that the biggest banks in the United States are liquid. And we're going to make sure by giving them immediately $500 million in 1932. With the assumption that once you know at the top you're okay, you're going to start lending that money. You're going to start doing what capitalists do, and that is taking opportunities that present themselves in a down market. They still are looking, businesses are still looking and going, we're not sure where this thing is going. And this exact same thing happened in 2007, 2008. So these too big to fail institutions got bailed out and sat on the money, right? I'm not going to lend it down the stream, right? What Hoover looks like is exactly what George W. Bush and then Barack Obama are going to look like, bailing out Wall Street, bailing out the biggest institutions that are there. Again, the money is not inconsequential. It's too late to stem the tide for the economy, right? In terms of that, and you can see in 1932 that there's a brief dip in the amount of failures, but it's going to come back. Why? Because this money is not trickling down. This money is staying in the hands of these institutions. They all succeed. All of our lending institutions today date themselves back to before the Great Depression. Why? Because the government bailed them out, right? And they didn't return the favor. Right? By contrast, these same years, notice this is January of 1932, you've got thousands of World War I veterans. Most of these are combat veterans, honorably discharged. There's no GI Bill. They have been promised upon their discharge a series of payments over the years. Every, I think, 3 years, they get a payment for an extent of 12 or 14 years, something like that. They're going to say, you just bailed out the biggest banks. When the country said, go and die for us, because, follow our lead and go put your life on the line, we did it. And what we're asking for is not a bailout. We're not asking for money in advance. What we're asking for is that money that's promised to us, at least give us access to it as a credit line, right? So we can save our businesses, save our farms, save our homes, pay the kids' medical expenses, whatever the hell you want to do with the money, right? They're going to petition that same Republican Congress and say, listen, you just bailed out the banks. What they're met with is the full force of the military. And just scraped off the surface of the mall in Washington. Lincoln Memorial is being built at this point in time, but it's still, you still see the structures that are kind of going on. But no clearer message could be sent that says, well, if you are a multi-millionaire and you are a multi-millionaire business like one of the lending institutions, J.P. Morgan or what have you, yeah, we're going to make sure you're too big to fail. But if you're an American, average American, you're on your own. Right? And in fact, we sure as hell aren't going to allow you to pull your truck under the bridge or the equivalent of kind of contemporary society. So the Great Depression presents these kinds of pressures on American society. Make no mistake, Hoover, within the confines of being a conservative Republican, is responding. Hoover is doing the things we're going to see. He's just not doing them at the scale and the size of the American economy requires. Right? So you get shot in a battlefield, somebody puts a Band-Aid on it. It'll keep the blood from getting on your uniform, but it ain't gonna solve the problem. It's sort of the same thing going on. Right? If you'll notice in the question, I talk about what makes it great. Great is not a good thing in this country. It's great. Infamous. We'll get back to infamy. We'll talk about World War II. Great in this case is not. What makes it great is, in essence, the fact of what it does to Americans' sense of what they can do to protect themselves in an industrial capitalist society. Right? The populists are saying, slow down, way back when. Slow down. Industrial capitalism does not care about your interests as an American citizen. Does not care about your upward mobility. Does not care about all the things that you, I'm a native-born, college-educated white male, I'll be all right. Or I own some land, or I own some property, I'll be all right. What the Great Depression does is just slice that right down to the roots. It's saying, in essence, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to be susceptible to these same kinds of pressures. Everyone is now suddenly looking at one paycheck to paycheck being the destructive one that takes your family down. You too could be poor. Wait a minute, I only thought it was people of color. I only thought it was this group that makes me feel better about myself. No, you are as vulnerable to the tiger as everybody else. And it has a particularly negative effect on the middle class. Middle class, what defines the middle class? Well, you ask 10 people, you get 11 answers. But what I would say is the middle class is upwardly mobile. Meaning what? Meaning you have $1,000 today, you expect to have $1,500 next year. You want to have more. Now, it may not always be financial. Maybe security, maybe life you live, et cetera, et cetera. But as I've mentioned, the two rock-solid ways in which the middle class is going to be upwardly mobile economically: own your own home and invest in the stock market. 120 years to prove, right? It's like, no, buy gold. Okay, whatever, you go buy gold. Right? Those two are the ones that are tried and true in terms of economic. Both of those institutions are absolutely hamstrung as a result of this. So the way out, supposedly, if you play by the rules and make the right choices and self-denial and all that kind of stuff, now seems to be in collapse as well. Industrial capitalism, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, U.S. Steel, right? What's good for GM is good for America. They don't have any answers. Right? Henry Ford arguably had an answer for why he didn't want unions and, I'll treat my workers well, I'll pay them well. I'll treat them like aspiring middle-class Americans. They are going to, again, I'm not categorizing. If you look and say the job of Ford Motor Company is to make money, then when you're not making money, you can pretty well expect Ford Motor Company to cut jobs, to cut wages, to cut those kinds of things. So it's like being critical of something, this is what it does, right? A shark eats. Welfare capitalism is suspended, and you've got, in essence, 20 years of Americans saying, I hate my Charlie Chaplin job with the wrenches, but I'm doing it because it's providing me something that it's a social compact between myself and industry. That's gone. Wait a minute. I just don't have health insurance. I don't have a minimum wage. I don't have safety conditions on the job. Nope, gone. Deal with it, right? I see Mexico has just had a revolution to deal with it. I see Russia just had a revolution to deal with it. I see that there's cracks in Germany and England and France to deal with it. It creates radical pressures. And why is it great? Because in essence, you're seeing 40%, if not closer to 50%, of the American public completely left behind. Right? I mentioned this. The choices made during Reconstruction by Southern leaders was to say, screw I don't care. We want our peculiar institutions. We want, at least these people are not black, right? Hey, look at the life they live. Most of the South is going to be in these conditions for 60 years. And one thing you can say about Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal is that changes the South. The South you lived in is a product of Franklin Roosevelt, a product of the New Deal. But you're seeing people like this, again, first question should always be, how come that boy's got no pants on, right? Put some pants on that kid, right? Whatever. Family show here is, in large part, they're gone. They're left behind. There's no option. They're not looking and saying, well, I can't wait to start my new .com, right? They're no longer Americans, effectively. And when you tie all this together, what you've got is, and I mentioned this in regards to progressivism, what drives the United States generally is a sense of optimism, hope, tomorrow's better than today. I know I'm sure, and it's not lottery ticket optimism. It's not, oh, someone's gonna pick me out of a crowd and I'll be the next, whatever. It's saying, I know the rules, I know how to keep track of them, I'm smart enough to make the right decisions, and by those decisions, I can begin to amass wealth. I can begin to make myself more secure, and my kids will be more secure, and I can have upward mobility. All that's gone. And that's the heart of the United States, right? You look at some of these statistics, right? Not that putting people out is one thing. 100,000 Americans apply to work, think it's better in the Soviet Union. Births fall, marriages fall, right? And optimism, that sense of I'm in control of my life, which everyone in this room, myself included, is hopefully has this sort of core value of themselves. I can do this, right? I can manage this. Capitalism, progressivism, middle, all of this is being swept away. That's what makes it great. And great in a bad way, like a great storm or a great white Toyota, whatever, other great things that aren't necessarily, into this, I should say, as a part of this is that sense you can begin to see in terms of the photography. Photography, by this point in time, if you like photographing, whatever, they weren't just taken from phones, they were literally developed when they're just a great era of realistic photography, of looking at people who otherwise aren't pretty or doing something heroic or what have you. Dorothea Lange, a woman who does a lot of, and most of these photographs are available through the Library of Congress. This image is so haunting, not only because, the children are looking away, I'll get back to that in a second, but this woman has no answer. What is she supposed to do, right? And if somebody's going to come to her and say, guess what, you just vote for me and I will provide all of the solutions, right? Well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to nationalize the economy. I'm going to have Volkswagens, all right? I'm going to begin to barricade the United States away from foreign competition, right? It's going to start to sound appealing. Into this environment comes this guy, Franklin Roosevelt. And I love these images because they really do reflect the public persona of this guy and the reason why you have such a strong affinity, right? In a weird way, the same thing is true for Trump. The best analogy to Franklin Roosevelt, if you're a conservative, is Ronald Reagan. And I'll come back to Ronald Reagan, and we'll spend a lot of time on Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and Franklin Roosevelt have a lot of similarities in terms of the affinity they have towards people. He is extremely optimistic, and you can see the kind of bearing that he has here. Yeah, cigar holder straight up, and yeah, life is great. He's the only child of a multimillionaire. I think life would be pretty good for the only child of a multimillionaire. How am I doing? Yes, I got a couple more minutes. Only child of a multimillionaire. His father is in his late 50s. His mother, when he's born, his mother is in her late 20s. Right? So daddy is not part of he is the adoring focus of his mother. I always say his feet probably never touched the ground in either servants or whatever until he was 12 years old. He had everything done for him. He is not an intellectual. He's a very smart person, but he goes to all the proper schools and does kind of beat work. He's known as a party boy. He's known as a friend. Everybody likes him. Everybody likes being around him. And he is going to become a Democrat in New York, in large part because New York is a Republican state. And Rich Boy didn't want to wait in line, right? It's like, oh, I got to be alderman, and I got to do this, and I got to do that, and the Republicans control the state house. I'll be a Democrat, right? And his success at being able to use his kind of upbringing and his connections and what have you are going to translate into New York political success. 1920s, he becomes the Democratic governor of New York. He is talked about as a vice presidential nominee. And when he turns 39 years of age, 39, after living a life like this, right? He contracts a childhood ailment, polio. And all of a sudden, kaboom, everything is kind of tossed on edge. But what in essence, what you're looking at here is a guy who is the most unlikely poster child for the New Deal. This is a guy who should be a conservative Republican, but instead what he does is sort of dive into that idea of American optimism. And that's where I'll pick up again on Wednesday, and we'll kind of walk through the New Deal.